Hello and welcome to the D&D 420 podcast. This is a show dedicated to helping you become a better dungeon master. I'm your host Eric M. Hunter, and I am a struggling game master trying to figure out how to tell a better story. Joining me shortly is Jimmy Shields. He is the creator of D&D 420 and an avid D&D fan with over 30 years of experience. In this episode, we dive back into my world building. I've built some more towns. I've kind of created some interesting ideas within certain cities. And tried to really focus on the import-export flora and fauna that we talked about in the last episode, and just when I thought I was done. Okay, so I took the week and went back and I re-listened to what we were talking about last week about, the flora, the fauna, the imports, the exports, what do things smell like, what are the players going to hear when they walk into these places. And I didn't write anything from this entire week until early today before we recorded. Yay. And I had this kind of like weird flow state where just everything kind of bursted. So what I did is I did what you suggested or what we came up with, which was the idea of like just picking some random place, going to the Wikipedia page and seeing what their import and their exports were and stuff like that. I ended up somewhere in Switzerland. I can't remember the name of the town. But again, it sparked some inspiration. So I really dived into Bellspro, which is the high city that everybody basically bows down to, and I wanted to make it kind of like organic. So I've got things like there's vines, vinage vegetation that goes throughout the entire city. It lines the sidewalks, it hugs all of the buildings. It twists around lamps. And then at night, these vines become very luminescent and they're bright enough to kind of light the surrounding area. When we're talking about imports and exports, I decided to create another town called Westbridge. And Westbridge is basically, for lack of a better term, it's a slave enslavement camp where they mine a core that's built out of the ground, and then they use that core at Bellspro at the high city to fashion armor and weapons, and they use it as trade, stuff like that. And then that gave me the idea for this for that Westbridge. So I was like, okay, so it's an enslavement camp. So I want it even worse than when St. Onst is. Like I want it like to be I want it the second the players get there, like it's dirty, it's everything's shacks, and it's a shanty town, and everything stinks of like this acidic smoke that gets in your eyes. And the closer you get to the mines where this core is mined, the harder it is to breathe, the harder it is to see. Just a shit place.
This is Bellspro?
No. So this is Westbridge.
Okay,
this is
Westbridge.
Like
Okay.
Yeah, no. Bellspro is that's why I wanted to do like the like all the organic and everything, because there's nothing like that anywhere else. It's almost like they stole all the vegetation and all the animals and all the beautiful scenery, and they put it back into this high city. And now these other two towns that are nearby that are basically supplying everything to this high city is just like straight trash.
They're shafted. Okay.
Yeah. So it was boring, to say the least, because it's like, as I said in the last episode, I was like, man, I just want to start writing this campaign. Because then that will tell me what they need to see. That will tell me what they need to hear and smell and that kind of thing, which goes against everything that we're doing.
Let me ask you something. Are you ready for some good news, bad news situation?
Oh, I don't know. That all sounds bad to me, but now go ahead. Give me the bad news.
The bad news is you got a lot more work to do to finish up the world.
Right.
Right? Doesn't it feel like it too?
It does, yeah, because now I'm at this point, so I've got 3 towns, I've got a load of conflicts, I've got a load of varying degrees of damn near everything, and now I feel like, I just want to keep, now I'm I'm enjoying it, you know what I mean, like I want to keep doing it.
That's cool, that's really cool, like, start adding on, maybe remove yourself from this area and go to a different area at some point and do the same thing. And you might even find that when you're doing this and creating other areas, now you have to link them together or decide why they don't talk or how they don't talk or what, what's holding them back or, whatever. And figure all of that out. And, the more you start to do that, the bigger your world can be, and the bigger populations you'll feel comfortable creating and creating conflicts with, and larger scale events happening. But you can kind of do what you've done and rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat and make all these cities and all these towns. And once you get into it, further down the road, you'll get a lot quicker at it, where you can crush the amount of work you've done, like I did with this recent world, in just a couple of weeks.
Right.
Easily, because I started 3 weeks after you, and I've done probably a lot more work than you've done so far.
Sure.
But for me, it's easy, and I have ideas, and I've done it many times, and I already have an idea of what all the imports and exports in a fantasy world look like. I don't have to research it. I already know because I've done it so many times.
Right.
And when I want to add something in, it's easy to do, and I can think about how it throws other things off. But go ahead, as you were saying.
No, I think it's one of those things where it's like you kind of need to move. You need to move the line on every aspect of the world building. So you need to move the line on, or the meter, I guess you could say. Like, okay, so if I create a town, I create it. I go from start to finish of what it looks like, and like what we just did, like imports, exports, that kind of thing. But I also need to draw that city on a map. And then I also need to figure out what's the surrounding that area. Do you know what I mean? Like, I haven't been doing like the area building and that kind of thing.
Well, for that, you'll only do Bellspro, and you might do like a smaller sketch. Maybe a different sketch, or probably work with those map makers a little bit more, and see if there's a way that you can get that map looking the way you want. Because we started off with the map, and for you, it might have been better to end drawing the map, and so. Let me give you some good news now. We talked about that was the bad news. You got a ton more work to do if you really want to make this into a world, like an entire planet with everything finished, weather patterns and everything. There's a lot that you can do. But the good news is you've done enough so far that you can go ahead and start playing. Because what's going to happen if you start playing, you're really going to flesh this area out. You've created enough that it would be weeks before the players are really going to get to an area that you don't have created. You can keep them in this area now for really an entire campaign if you wanted to. I feel that you've got enough there for that. You'll have to create more for these areas, and it'll be fun fleshing them out. And in the meantime, you can be writing down, the way we started, kind of notes about other ideas you have that don't fit in this world. Because I guarantee while you're role-playing and storytelling in this area, some things that you'll write will never come to pass, and you can totally save them for things in the future and use it as whole town seed starters or adventure hook starters for other things. So the good news is go ahead and start playing if you want, or go ahead and start adventuring, or go ahead and start talking to your players about it. Or continue to write, whichever you feel more comfortable with at this point. So that's like the kind of good news, bad news is you've got a choice now. If you wanted to, it's only been a little over a month, and you're already prepared to start writing. Go back to season 1 and start writing the minutia for your campaign, which you talked about you really wanted to do. So now that you've got this beautiful setting, really all you have to do to complete this is think about what type of animals and monsters. Finish off that flora and fauna by getting that, and finish your food chain out a little bit. Why is this such a dangerous place to live? Well, now the monsters are really going to tell that story. And since you've got a backstory to it, when you start adding these monsters to it, you're going to realize that they even change. They're going to greatly impact. You may have some in mind already, but as you're looking for more, you might find monsters that will impact the ecosystem that you've created in a way that you like. Don't be afraid to continue to morph this before you unveil it. So that's really the last thing you've got to do, is prepare it to write that campaign.
Yeah, so, and I was thinking too, like, if suddenly I need to add something, or I need to manipulate something, like, I feel like, to me, these towns are fleshed out enough that I'd be like, oh, well, it would be XYZ because of this thing that I've already talked about, and this thing that's already here. Like, I feel like the answers would come a lot faster.
You were getting common sense about your world.
Right, exactly.
well, common sense dictates since this and this are true, then this must be the answer. That makes sense to me as the one writing it, because you're starting to see these people that live here. Those are starting to form cultures in your head, you know, and that's what I was kind of getting at with having you create things the way we did. Is it really starts to color that culture. You see why they choose the thing they choose, why their towns look the way they look. And it's really cool to dive into that now that you've got the ideology for it, and start writing for that campaign of what's it going to look like there, what's it going to smell like. Really start coming up with some adjectives that you're going to tell the players, and some monsters they're going to fight, and some animals they'll see that might be exotic. Maybe take things from around the world or exaggerate some things that exist in our habitat, and make that into some neat scenes, or you know, other small minutia about the town, shops, places, interesting things, interesting people, not necessarily rulers, leaders, or people that are movers and shakers, but just interesting shit that the players are going to come across. That's for the campaign portion.
Right. Yeah, that, and I feel like too it's kind of never ending. Like, so where do you put where do you pump the brakes then? Like, let's say, because I mean, realistically, you could probably build this world for forever. Like, you could always find another island, you can always find another city, you can go high in the air, you can go deep in the ocean. Like, so when's enough?
Well, here's the thing. Once you've had players in your world, they have to understand that this is a growing world and there's a reason that we never heard about this superpower before. And that reason is because it wasn't created yet. Like this 3-kingdom thing or 4-kingdom thing that I'm creating now, along with you, that I'll unveil at the end of this season. And the last episode, I think I'm going to express to you everything that I've written for it, and how I got to it, and why I got to it. And, you know, we'll take the whole season to show your stuff and how you got there. And then I'll unveil something that I've done, and we'll make both available for people to check out and see what we've done. But I kind of digress, because like this place that I'm building is going to have a major impact because they have the ability to sail, and they could probably have a much higher probability of having far-reaching sailing ships than some of the other places I've created that do know about things that are far away. So that becomes a really strange like anomaly. Like, why is Verendor and Kyoden, why is this place, and the third name is still in flux, so I'm not going to mention it yet, but the other two are going to stick. Why are these two major powers not impacting the rest of the world for 20 something years of gaming? So that's when you probably reached the point at which, okay, never mind, this isn't going into the current world. This is something else entirely.
Right.
This is a new campaign setting. So when you get to that point where it seems impossible to be adding what you're adding, you've probably gone too far, or improbable that it would have happened the way it happened in the past. Okay, stop, you've got enough. Like at first, everyone's going to understand. Everyone's going to get it. We're building this together, like with the players and stuff. But after 20 years, or after 5 years, or after how long you've been playing, and you feel like you've got 150 cities you've played in, and like all these places you've mentioned, talked about, or have affected the game in some way, and everybody knows about it. The same players that you've played with all know about it. Hell, man, I'm too high. I don't even know what I was going to say next. I had a really solid point there.
Well, let me ask you this. Like,
damn it.
How do you get it to a point where, like, let's say, like, how do you make it so it looks like I'm not creating, or I'm not world building just to solve a problem that just happened in a session? Do you know what I mean?
By now, there's another thing you can do, and I was going to mention, I think I was just too high. There was another thing I was going to say that you need to do to get ready, and I said there was only one thing, and that's insert the like monsters and creatures. But there is another thing that you need to do, and that is drop seeds for other areas. Names. Like, know that there's goods that come from somewhere else exotic. Things like that. Because if you drop the name in session 2 of your first campaign, but no one ever goes there, you don't have to have anything made. All you have to know is these bright red rubies come from there, and they're adorning this very specific type of art or jewelry that comes from there that the king's mistress loves. And where is it from? Oh, it's from Kyoto, this far away exotic place where they have tan colored skin and almond shaped eyes, or whatever, And you never have to meet a person from there. There never has to be any talk of it. Like, oh, it's foreign, it's exotic, you don't know about it much. And like, once a player starts to ask, you could even say, pump the brakes and say, hey, can we talk about that outside of the game? I don't want to take up the time. And you can always jump on it, write a little bit more to pepper in. And that'll give you things that can stew on the back burner, or things that you might just want to switch over and say, okay, I got to work on this now because X, Y, and Z, this player's asking about it. But if you start dropping those hints and giving those little, these other places exist feel, it'll always feel like this world has always existed.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that's one of the things that makes names so powerful. If you have that name and you give like a mystique to it right in the beginning,
right,
and it's something that's different than the language that you're using here and all these other people's names, just a little different. If you've created a constant or a culture around the way you name things in the area that you're playing in, and then you change that culture for the name of something exotic, you give a little short story about it, like we said, with it's a specific type of ruby or a specific type of jewelry, a specific type of people. Maybe it's a race or a class that you hear always comes from there. Like, they're well known for their jewelry and their warrior women. Their women are actually fighters, and they wear a certain type of armor, or whatever the case may be. Needs no stats, needs no real background, just a little bit of flair. That player will remember that when it comes up later. 3 campaigns from now, when they finally get there and you've finally gotten to working on that area, now you've got it all fleshed out and ready to go. And now a new thing takes place there. And it's always been mysterious, and they're 10th level and they made it there, and this mysterious place feels fresh and new, but at the same time it feels ancient. It feels powerful. It feels far-reaching.
Well, and the other thing I was just thinking too, like, I haven't done anything like the only things I've created so far are places that are occupied. Like, I haven't tried to look at any kind of mountain range or valley, or if there's a desert nearby, or a giant lake or something. I haven't done any of that yet.
Yeah, you're going to need to do that stuff as well. And there might be ruins. It sounds like a lot of that type of stuff. Now, the desert, is there a desert nearby? What is the topography? That's why we want to do the map.
Right.
Because then you can decide what is everywhere, and you can see the big picture of this large area. You say, oh, okay, this entire area has here, the swamp is this far away, so they don't think about it much. Much closer is the desert. They talk about it. It affects their life. Weather affects the area. And that's, kind of in with the flora and fauna department. There's a reason why you have the flora and fauna you do. Make it make some kind of sense. It can be fantastic, it can be out there, and it can be crazy. But for me, why? Why do I need to do that? There's times I do. There's times I get nuts with it. But that's when it is connected to the storyline, or when it has something to do with a stat in game. It affects the players. It affects their characters somehow. But for the most part, I just make it make sense. And I may pepper in, this is something I made up. And it's a little neat. and give it a name, give it a reason for being there. But that's going to be the outlying. Now you've chosen a town in a specific area. I'd suggest
Right.
making the surroundings similar to the surroundings of that area so it makes sense. So it feels right.
Let me kind of go back on something you just mentioned, where you were saying like, don't. It doesn't have to be crazy. It doesn't have to be fantastic. I don't remember if we talked about this or not, but at what point, let's say you need some sort of fast travel system, like a horse. Like, do you just create the horse and let the horse be in the world? Do you create something new? Why? Why not?
Well, the mount or the pack animals that any given culture will use is going to depend on a couple of things. One, availability, and two, needs. What needs do they have, and what's available? What's best suited, that's available.
Okay.
And that's going to come from the wildlife. And so that wildlife needs to be supported. Like cows need grass. Snakes need taller grasslands or swamps or what rivers. Certain animals need certain terrains, and certain terrains breed at these type of animals. So I'm sorry, what was the question again?
So what, like, when would it make sense to create an animal in place of something as
Oh,
common as a horse?
when
Like,
you
why would you
really
do that? Or
when you really want to add flair, when you really want it to stand out. Like remember in Volcaminar when oh, you weren't in this game. You haven't played in Volcaminar, have you?
yeah, the last game that we were playing with
Oh
me
yeah, yeah.
and
Gosh, man, can you tell I took a
it was a
zinger
while.
before we got on here?
Well, it was a long time ago too. I mean, it's been
It's been
almost.
a
I mean,
year.
we're coming up on a year
Yeah,
or
it's
more than a year.
good news. It's about to start up again.
Hey.
After we're allowed to visit one another.
Yeah, right.
But it's ready now. But anyway, we could play online as well, so that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah.
Not that I want to. I'd rather play in person. But anyway, back to the. So in Volcaminar, the players had gotten far away from Volcaminar and the mirror side of your game. They got really far out there, and they needed to get pack animals to come back, but they were in like kind of a foreign area. So I made to make it feel foreign, I made up these six-legged, thin, slender, long, sleek, dexterous, can climb on the walls and ceilings, type of reptiles like lizards that were anywhere from 8 to 16 feet long, 8 feet being a young adult, 16 feet being like the longest they ever come. And they can easily carry humans, or even the big ones could carry even a large creature, and they can get through really tight spaces. Why did I create this? Because I wanted to show, like, well, this is a really exotic environment, so it's going to take a really exotic thing to want to ride it. It needs to be strong enough. It needs to give you an advantage over the terrain. So this thing can walk on the walls, and you can strap yourself into this saddle, and it can move relatively quickly through relatively small spaces, even with a rider on it. And the saddle is flexible so that you can lay back on the mount, or you can lean all the way forward and get through those really difficult crevices.
Right.
So I had a few different needs there, and I didn't want to use anything that had been previously made in the books. It just I'm a little bit of a hard-headed DM that way, because I don't want all of my players to understand all of the stats to the creatures and animals that are around them
Right.
right away. I like there to be mystery. I may use stats from out of the book, but I just tweak them a little bit, change the name, change the way they look, and you have no clue what their hit dice are, special attacks, vulnerabilities, weaknesses, any of that stuff. You guys have no idea if I don't want you to have an idea, because I want it to feel foreign, or I want it to feel strange, or I want it to feel fantastic.
Right.
You can't get fantastic out of the same thing that you fought over and over again for the past 30 years playing D&D. A goblin is great if you've never played D&D before, but man, you get sick of the goblin after 30 years of goblins.
No, that makes sense because I mean, if you wanted to just play, a run-of-the-mill D&D game, like you would just play one of the games out of the manual. You know what I mean? Like you would just play just one of the pre-made campaigns.
Exactly. You can play all of the monsters and all of the creatures, all the animals that D&D says there are, but we're making our own world and we want it to feel
Right.
we want it to feel unique. So every now and then it's good to add those things. And I
Because
suggest do it.
Why else would you be making the game then? If you're why else would you make the world if you're not going to do anything fun and exciting with it?
Right. Lots of things you just want it to make sense and make it to be easy to storytell through. But every once in a while, get out there a little bit. And the more often you get out there and it makes sense in the game and it feels like it's actually believable and connectable and relatable,
Right.
the more you do that, the more your players are going to appreciate it because it's going to feel like they're not in our world. They're in a true fantasy world, a true fairy tale land where things are bizarre, where things are unique, things are incredible, things are fantastic. It is fantasy after all.
So, okay, got more work to do.
All right, I've got a little more work to do.
So I'll probably try to think because I think it'll just be easier for me to hand draw a map. So I'll probably just do that, just for the sake of the podcast, and then that way, once I draw that map, I'll get an idea of like what new towns and areas and places in the world I'll have to create to fill that map. Just another quick question. So, in terms of the size, like, do we just assume that all of these are just it's a planet in and of its own, regardless of how big the landmass is itself? Like, it all understands mostly of what we adhere to regular rules of reality in terms of gravity and that kind of thing within means anyway.
Well, that's an interesting thing to bring up, and if you were going to assume yes, then I was going to go, okay, that, let's not address it. But there are a multitude of different like world types that you could create, like different types of realities, different types of dimensional existences of like what is a planet, what could be a planet. Does it have to make sense scientifically in our reality? No, it does not. This is fantasy. It does not have to make any sense whatsoever. Because if you remember, my world used to be, like
the water was in the sky.
Yeah, there were layers like an onion. There were several layers from top to bottom. So, it started with the moons, and then you had the surface, and then you had what was beneath the surface, and the water was in the sky.
Right.
And then you had the Underdark, the Wilderdark. So there was all these different layers, and that really made it feel fantastic. So if you want to do something like that, by all means, change something about it to create a different feel. There's no reason not to, as long as it's not too hokey. If you get too hokey with it, it can feel like a cartoon. Unless you want your game to feel like a cartoon, don't make cartoonish scenarios. Find ways to make it tie together that makes sense from like an ecological or a biological standpoint.
Sure.
A scientific standpoint works because we all want to believe that's true. Even in a fantasy world, a lot of times we still want to believe that certain things are relatable. And it's going to be hard to relate to something too foreign. And it's not going to make any sense if you get too exotic or too out there from our reality. And it might not be fun at all because it may not have any kind of bearing back to something I can understand.
Right. There needs to be a toe somewhere on something that you can lean on.
Yeah. There needs to be something relatable. So, just don't get too out there. Otherwise it feels cheesy and unbelievable. But get out there and even if it's something that seems minor that you've changed, you'll find ways when you're writing your campaign, especially if we use the processes that we've talked about in season 1 of the D&D 420 podcast. If you use those processes, you're going to be able to relate back to it again and again and make it feel serious, even if it's a small change. So remember that too. It doesn't have to be mind-blowing of a thing to tell somebody, like, it's this multiple world theory and there's 100 worlds and you're on one of them.
Right, because you lose people right away because they get lost in the details.
Yeah, don't try to... And it can be something as simple as there's like a little spark of electric to everything. So it's like every once in a while you see this little electricity. It doesn't really affect things too much, but then you'll find little nuances to say, well, this is an anomaly that occurs, or this is a thing that happens.
Because of the thing that we've already discussed.
This little detail. There are these little electrical things that happen. It's an anomaly, and maybe we'll name it. Or like you said, you have these glowing vines. That's a thing all over the world.
Yeah, so that was the first thing that came to mind. It was like, I could use something with that. Maybe
there's a reason. Maybe it's a thing that made them glow. And maybe it's a thing that happens. Like in the Underdark for D&D, I don't know how to say it, like the phrases or something like that. Or the phrases.
Oh, I know. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
I don't know what it is or how to say it. I couldn't spell it right now either, but it's R.A. Salvatore, I believe, wrote a lot about it in the Dark Elf trilogy. And it was this bioluminescent, magical, stuff.
It was kind of like a goo, wasn't it? I thought he described it as like it was like very viscous.
Yeah, like a living magic or something.
Yeah.
So
it's pure.
It's an anomaly that happens all over the Underdark, in different pockets and areas. So that's a neat thing that you just change the reality of the Underdark by adding this magical thing. So you can totally do something that subtle, and it makes a huge impact overall.
Right. It just because like you were saying before, it makes it feel more lived in.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's what I'm gonna do.
So what 3 things you're gonna do? You're gonna.
So I'm gonna build the map. I'm gonna redraw the map. I'm going to start filling out like those missing areas, and then I'm gonna pick like a thing that's unique. Thanks for listening to this episode of the D&D 420 podcast. For everything D&D 420 related, check out dnd420.com. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us there on the website and on YouTube at D&D 420. Lastly, as always, if you'd like to support the show, you can do that by telling another DM about the show and by visiting us on Apple Podcasts and leaving a rating and review. Thanks for subscribing and being a part of our work here at D&D 420. We will see you next week.